Okay, welcome back to the tutorial in C++ basic programming with Andy. Today we'll be going over loops. So we're going to go over the while loop, do while loop, and the for loop. Now, what are loops first off? Loops are kind of like conditions almost, or they're just what they sound like. They're a loop, and they execute a block of code as long as a condition is met or a condition is reached. Loops are very good for saving time, saving code, and making things look organized in general. So we'll start with the while loops, and I'll give you a very basic example. So we'll set this as our counter. So I'll say counter is equal to 0. And then the syntax for a while loop is a lot like the syntax for a condition. So instead of if, we'll have while, and then our condition here. So while counter is less than 10, and then our curly braces. So while our counter is less than 10, we can print out counter, or you know what, let's make it fancy. Counter is at counter. And then unline. And then the most important thing for while loops is to always make sure that your while loop has a finish point. What do I mean by that? Well, the way this is going to run is that it's going to see that counter is equal to 0, and since this condition is met, it's going to run this, and it's going to run this, and it's going to run this and run this and run this, because this condition is always going to be met. So it's going to print this 1,000 times. Now what we want to do is make sure that we increase our counter here. So if we go ahead and do that, then each time this runs, it's going to say like, oh, okay, 0 is less than 10, print this, and then add 1 to our counter. So our counter now becomes 1, and our counter will become 2, and then 3, and then you can guess what happens. So if we go ahead and run this, we can see counter is at 0, counter is at 1, and it stops at 9, because that, when counter reaches 10, 10 is no longer less than 10, so this boolean now becomes false instead of true, and then our while loop breaks. We can also use the keyword break in our while loop. So, for example, we can also nest if conditions within our while loop. So for example, if we go ahead and say if counter, oh, that's not the right syntax. If counter is equal to 7, and then we'll go up here, and then we'll say cout, and 7, 7, 7. Now, and then if we run this again, at 7, it should say 7, 7, 7, counter is at 7. So we can actually put in if statements within our while loop. Why is this important? Well, we can use the break keyword. And what will break do is that it will stop running our while loop once the counter reaches 7. So if counter is equal to 7, it's going to stop. Make sure you put the break above everything else so nothing else runs, and then our while loop is finished. The next loop we'll be going over is the do while loop. Now the do while loop is very interesting. Basically, the do while loop will run your block of code once, and then it will check the condition if it's true, and if it's true, then it will repeat the while loop. So the syntax for the do while loop is do, and then our block of code, and then the while condition. So even, it kind of makes sense, right? So you're going to do this code first, and then while this is true, then you're going to keep doing it. So we can go ahead and create a integer again, and we'll call it O, and integer O is going to be equal to 0. And it's going to be the same code that I showed you, except that we're going to make our condition if while O is bigger than 10. Or while I is bigger than 10. Oh, it should be O. So now we can go ahead and say cout, and we'll just put test just for simplicity, because we know that this is only going to run once. Why? Because 0 is not bigger than 10. However, since we're using a do loop, it's still going to run. This is going to be really useful for game logic, because, for example, if you want to put like user input, you can go ahead and put like string, or we'll put char response, and we'll go and cout, do you want to play again? And then we'll ask for the response, right? And then while response is equal to, while response, we'll go ahead and set this to n by default. That's not right. While response, and while response is equal to n, oh, spelling mistake. Should go away. Oh, right. Make sure if you're using a variable you put it on the outside. Otherwise, you'll have to deal with like global issues. So what this should do is it's going to ask us if we want to play again. And we write n, and it's going to ask us again, do you want to play again? We're going to put no. And this thing doesn't take no for an answer, which is not good for in life or in general. And if we put do we want to play again as yes, then it's going to break, because our response is now gone. It's y, so it's not going to run anymore. Okay, now we'll be going over for loops. So let's go ahead and comment this all out. And we'll be going over for loops. So now, when do we use for loops? So for loops are when we know exactly how many times we want to loop through a block of code. So for example, if we want to print out every single value in an array, let's go ahead and say my array. Remember from last episode, we can go ahead and put a size in our array. So we'll put it as size 5. And then give it a bunch of values up to 5. So now we know that we want to loop through this array 5 times. So we can use for, and then the syntax is going to be statement 1, statement 2, and statement 3. Statement 1 is executed 1 time before the execution of the block. This is normally going to be initializing a variable, right? And we can go ahead and call this variable anything, but we'll call it counter. And we want to separate each of these statements by a semicolon. So now statement 2 defines the condition for executing the code block. Same thing like a condition like if, same thing like while. So you can think of it as like kind of like while. So while counter is less than or equal to 5, then keep running this loop. And then the last thing, just like a while loop, we're going to want to put I++. Or, sorry, counter ++. Typically, you'll see I, because I usually stands for iteration, which is kind of like the same thing as counter. And then same thing, like the other conditions, you want to put your squiggly brackets for your code. And then now, it's going to run whatever's in here 5 times. This is how we specify how many times exactly we want something to run. So let's go ahead and say cout, and we want to access each element in our array. So we can, remember, we can use indexing, and for our indexing, we can actually use this counter variable that we created up here, right? This is something called a local variable, which means if we try and cout counter up here, it's not going to exist. That was an error that we had before. Oop. Index 5 is out of valid range. Right. Oh, let's go ahead and add another one. And we'll just say 6. Let's go ahead and run this. So what do you think it's going to print out? It's going to print out every number in our array, or every iteration in our array. So this is how you loop through arrays, and this is a for loop. We can go and show another example. So for example, if we want to say for integer I equals 0, and this doesn't have to be integer I, and it doesn't have to be equals 0. It could be integer I equals -15, and then while counter is I was looking up there, while I is equal to -15, and then our statement 3, and then we can go on to say I++ even though it won't do anything. And then same thing like a while loop, you can also nest if statements. So we'll go ahead and just put if I is equal, or if I is equal to not equal to -15. I always forget my brackets. If I is not equal to -15, then we're gonna go ahead and break out of our for loop. You can break out of that too. But then if it is, then we're going to say print I. Now this is kind of dumb because it's one, you don't really want to nest. Yeah, see, it even tells us ill-defined for loop. This is only going to be executed once, right? Because even C++ knows that it's going to change right away. And you don't really need an if statement in here. You could have put it here, but we'll go ahead and run this anyways and see if it runs. And yeah, it will run. It will put -15, but it's kind of useless. Yep. Okay, so we'll go on to the question section. Okay, so our questions for today are: create a while loop to loop through the numbers 10 to 30. Create a while loop to loop through even numbers from 1 to 10. Use a do loop to aggressively sell cookies, and use a for loop to loop through this array. So go ahead and pause the screen and try it. Okay. Create a while loop to loop through the numbers 10 to 30. So we'll say integer number, and we'll set it at 10, right? And then a while number, can't forget these. While number is less than or equal to 30. So we go ahead and see out num. I guess I didn't specify if you had to do this, but I'm specifying it now. So you got it wrong if you didn't do it like this. So now it should loop through 30 a bunch of times. Well, why did this happen? Because I never gave it a counter or anything like that. So we'll say num plus plus. I did this on purpose to make sure you guys don't make my mistake. So from 10 to 30. Good. Next question. Create a while loop to loop through even numbers from 1 to 10. So same thing. We'll create an even number. We'll go ahead and comment this out, because I can't think of any other number apparently, or any other name. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use a while statement, and then while num is less than 10, and I want to go ahead and put a if right away. So if num modulus 2, if num modulus 2 is equal to 0, oopsies, then I forgot to add my end parentheses. Then I want to see out the num. And then I'm gonna go ahead and increment num right here. And let's go ahead and see if this works. Yep. Oh, I guess it doesn't include 10. So we'll go ahead and rerun it. Good. So basically what's going on here is that while our number is less than or equal to 10, so we set it to 0, right? And then we're going to loop through an if condition. So if our number divided by 2 has no remainder, then we're going to write the number down. And then we're going to keep incrementing in the while loop and not in the if statement. Why do we increment down here? Well, because this won't actually be 10, or it won't actually stop at 10. Remember, it'll actually stop at 20. So we make sure to increment it in the while loop. And then once it reaches 10, it breaks out of the loop by itself. Use a do while loop to aggressively sell cookies. This is kind of like what I showed you in the example. But I was just testing, and it's good practice to make sure you remember the syntax. So we're going to say do, and then our block of code, and we'll put while condition. So do, and then we'll create a character response, or we'll character answer, and let's go ahead and just set this out here, and we're going to set it to new. And we're gonna say cout in our string buy my cookies, and then we can go ahead and embed a new line character here, which I don't get to do often. And we're gonna input our answer, and then while answer is equal to n is when we're gonna keep running this loop. Oh, I can't type. So let's go ahead and run that. Buy my cookies. No. Buy my cookies. No. Buy my cookies. No. Buy my cookies. Yes, or anything other than no, then we will buy my cookies. And then the last question. Use a for loop to loop through this array. And our array is a string array called turtles with a size of 4. If you don't know who these are or what I'm referencing, I'm pretty disappointed. So we'll create a for loop. So for, and then we'll say integer I is equal to 0. So this is our counter. If I is less than 5, I plus plus. Or if I is less than 4, I plus plus. Then we can go ahead and just cout turtles I with a new line character. Then we go ahead and run that. Ooh, I should have put it as 5. Oh wait, no, we're fine. Ah, right, because of index positioning. And then it's going to print through each of the turtles. So Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. Very nice. All right. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.